So tell me, man, I got to know because I really enjoy. This is one of my favorite movies, and I remember seeing it when it came out. But the original idea for the movie Blood Diamond was
Oh my.
was that inadvertently based on your life and your adventures mining diamonds in Africa? Like, is it like how did it? Because I know that Brad Pitt's company, and then was George Clooney like interested in your life rights? That's what I heard.
Oh my. Oh my. Okay. So back around 1999, I had just returned from West Africa after about 3.5 years of a not so great experience in the gold and diamond exploration business. And just by coincidence, I was working with a friend who was producing a low budget sci-fi film in Los Angeles. And I'd been working with digital for a while. I was actually considered one of the top digital specialists because I'd been working with Panasonic cameras and Canon cameras, and nobody had really worked with digital yet for motion pictures. So I came into town because I'd done documentaries digitally for the better part of 3 years while I was doing stuff in Africa. And a friend of mine said, "Hey, you should take this sci-fi film that you're willing to help your friend with over to a studio and help get distribution." I said, "Well, funny enough, I grew up in Portland, Oregon. I know the owner of Dark Horse Comics. He's got a deal over at Universal Studios. He might like this." So I took it over and we just had a little lunch talk about the film and what's been going on. And he hadn't seen me for the better part of a decade. And he goes, "There was a rumor that you're dead." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, man, there was a rumor that you got like shot in the head or something like that over in Africa." And I said, "Well, I got shot and stabbed and was a POW for a few weeks and I had some really bad misadventures, but no, I'm not dead. Things are okay." He goes, "Well, could you just write up what you just told me a little bit into a one-page synopsis?" So I did. I just kind of wrote my one-page adventure to him. By coincidence, he was going to a major Hollywood agency the next day for a meeting. And he said, I got to tell you about this guy that I've known for like 30 years named Chris Patton. He just got back from Africa. He had this really weird adventure. He got shot and stabbed and he was hiding diamonds up his ass." And they go, "What? Really? Really?" Well, it just so
That
happens
got
that
their attention.
so Brad Pitt and Clooney were looking to do a remake of Humphrey Bogart's Sierra Madre that week. And there comes my treatment called Sierra Leone, about my adventures in West Africa, fighting with my partners over gold and diamond and some misadventures that we had. And they said, "Oh man, this is like the timing on this is perfect. Can we pitch it?" So they pitched it over at George Clooney's company, which was called Section 8 at the time with Steven Soderbergh. And then Brad Pitt, who had a deal with him, had a company called
Plan B.
Section 8 and Plan B. Thank you.
Plan B, I think.
And what happened was I ended up with something called a split rights deal. It was my very first deal. Warner Brothers optioned my life story rights, but Brad Pitt loved the treatment of my adventure. And my treatment was altered to sort of be a little more friendly towards anybody reading it. I didn't want to give him everything, right? And he loved it because he thought it was a dark comedy. So he signed on. Pitt signed on, and Warner Brothers, Lorenzo di Bonaventura sent me a message saying, "Oh my gosh, man, I used to mine, what was it? Sapphires and rubies in Argentina and Chile when I was a teenager, and your adventures reminded me of everything I used to do. We're doing this." So then within a week, I got an option on my life story, which they owned for about 7 years. And they owned the treatment called Sierra Leone for about 7 years. And for 3 years, they were just trying to figure out what stories they wanted to tell with it. And here was the other thing that had happened right after they optioned my treatment. There was a Vanity Fair story that came out in 2000 or so about blood diamonds. So just as I pitched it, just as I'd gotten an option, just as they bought my life story rights, it validated everything that I had just told these guys that they'd never heard about the blood diamond story that was going on over in Sierra Leone and Liberia at the time. So then everybody got really excited. They started bringing in writers from the City of God and some other people to kind of do their pass on it. And it kind of lingered around for about 3 or 4 years. And they just kind of pulled the elements out that they wanted to use for the film. And then with every deal, eventually, like within 2 or 3 years, they wander off and there's a studio exec change. Brad Pitt left Warner Brothers and went over to Paramount with Brad Gray, and the things just kind of moved around a little bit. But they optioned it 3 more times, and bits and pieces of my life managed to get worked into that story. Yeah.
That's so Hollywood. Yeah, that's incredible.
Chris, show them the scars, man, on your hand.
Oh yeah, show me the
close up.
Show me the scar on your hand.
Tell them about how you were walking around and all of a sudden like station wagons had like machine guns in them, and you're like, you don't really know like a revolution is going on, but you like tell them how you got over the border, that whole thing.
Oh, well, we were in this little area called Ma, which was we were right across the border of Ivory Coast, working our way over into Liberia. This is how we got things went sideways. For about a year, I was doing gold, and gold was fairly easy to sort of manage in terms of doing and finding it and getting deals for it and melting it down and smelting it, working with these companies called Sodame that would give you the cash for it. But it was a process, man. You could make a lot of money, but it was a process. Then about a year into it, I met with a South African, and that's kind of who they ended up sort of portraying in the film, the South African I worked with named Eric.
Yeah, I remember. Leo,
he was
right?
the
Leo
one,
played him, right?
Yeah. So he was a kind of a combination of the two of us together. So Eric had convinced me that, why are you doing all this work when you could do diamonds and you could do blue diamonds down here over in the rivers? So I bought into the idea, and for a while we were doing okay. And then it got a little rougher because the really good stuff is always in areas you're not supposed to be in. So we traveled over the border into Liberia, and we started staking our claim in a couple of villages, which means you go in there and you just basically agree to pay everybody's food and water and salaries, and you bring them little Kodak cameras that can take pictures and blue jeans, and basically you're just contracting with people who are sitting on piles of diamonds that they can't move out unless somebody shows up. About a year into it, we were driving out there, and we noticed that a lot of our stuff was turned over on fire. And 2 or 3 of the villages that we were visiting, nobody came out to visit you. Now, the rule of thumb at the time was if you show up to a village and nobody comes out, they're probably dead from Ebola. So you don't get out of your car. If there are chickens running around and no children, just don't get out. Just keep moving on. Well, in this case, there was lots of children running around, and there were chickens, but there are no adults. They'd either been shot or conscripted into this little guerrilla war. And we started having to go a little bit farther in. Now, at the time, you've seen so many weird things in the 2 years that you're there. You've seen just horrible murders and people being burned to death, and you just kind of get flat on it after a while. You see it so often that nothing really surprises you. But this was getting really strange because we didn't understand why they would be burning our stuff when we are their source of income. We'd been working with them very well for about a year, and we'd become friends. So we started going deeper in country, and the more deeper in country that we got, the more we noticed people were packing. And we saw a lot of sidearms. We saw a lot of machine guns, until one day we saw the Cadillacs rolling down the street with 14 and 13-year-old kids with AK-47s firing them into the air. And they were shooting them at whoever was in the street. And the challenge was they had these banana clips because they got all their weapons from Libya. So what they were doing is they were trading the gold and diamonds for weapons up north, and they'd bring them back down and arm. The military would arm anybody who could hold a gun, but they didn't train them very well. So what they do is they would shoot at you with these banana clips, and the guns would just go up.
Yeah, because the kids were so small, and
couldn't hit anything. So I was getting shot at constantly. And it was suddenly there'd be rain of gunfire, and the trees would be exploding all over the place, and you'd almost nobody in the team would ever get hit. Luckily, we got really lucky.
Like a terrible target practice, or what? Like what?
Well, they were eventually. I figured eventually they were going to learn, but they were just kids that were handed guns, and they said just go out and shoot anybody in these.
Oh, like
these
we
villages
throw snowballs at cars going by. They just fucking shoot their AKs.
Just shoot up. Just shoot up everything. So
Jesus.
Everything would get rattled to pieces. You'd go, oh man, another day. We survived again. I hope they don't come back tomorrow because they're limited on the amount of shells they've got. So they weren't trained very well, which was to our advantage for a while, but numbers were against us. So as we started getting deeper inland, we couldn't take roads anymore. We had to get catamarans with dredges on them. And that's going to be a long story, but we were moving in river. And we knew these areas where you could get some really good stones very quickly by high volume with dredge pumps. So my job was to sit on the catamaran with a shotgun, and I would pop the hippos and the gators that would come after my divers.
Oh man! Wow.
So that was about 3 months of that. Then eventually we wandered a little too deep into an area we shouldn't have been in. We didn't realize that a real civil war had started. We just thought these were skirmishes because they were just so sporadic and weird.
Yeah.
And I wasn't making any sense of it. But what had happened was a civil war had started around us, and the entire country was pretty much shut off. And the State Department had given any American a warning saying, listen, if you're there, you better get to the embassy now. We'll fly you out.
Wow.
But if you're not there, you're on your own. We didn't get that warning. We weren't getting the news. We didn't have cell phones. So we got that warning about 3 months too late, and we'd been cut off for a while. So by the time we got the warnings, my team was mostly dead. I had gotten picked up, taken to a small village. Bad things happened. I managed to escape after about 5 weeks.
Wow.
And I ran down to the embassy again. Actually, I ran to the embassy over in not the embassy, but I went up to a clinic. Actually, I ran into a clinic, told them I was American. They knew, and they were expecting a French guy to run in because there would be no Americans out where we were. Right.
Right.
So when I came in there, I couldn't speak to anybody because they were speaking this version called Bowley French, which was very difficult to understand if you could, even if you speak French. So they didn't know what was going on. I was torn up. I'd been cut twice. I'd been stabbed. My arm was chewed up a little bit from a graze on a gunshot. They patched me up. And then eventually I managed to hide in trunks on my way back over to the Liberian border by somebody who was kind enough to hide me in there for 3 days and make it back over to Yamoussoukro, which is the capital of that state. And then they flew me, they gave me an emergency flight to Switzerland where I hid for about 3 months.
Wow.
Not telling anybody what happened, didn't tell my investors what happened, didn't tell my family what happened. As far as I know, I was vacationing in Switzerland. And then I made an attempt to go back. This is how goofy you are. This is how gold struck you get by this stuff. You think, well, okay, I'm okay now. Time to go back and get my stash.
Yeah.
And I tried, and it didn't go well then either. So,
wow. That's crazy, man.